So here in day 8, we're going to be continuing where we left off in day 7, where I gave you a challenge to add an argument into this function and actually have that function work, or how does it work exactly. So this actually gives us a very good opportunity to talk more about functions and the various arguments that go into them. So let's actually do that example first. I'll say dog equals to animal, and then dog.getColor, parentheses. I'm going to go ahead and copy this whole thing out and go into terminal, come in here and see the error. Right, so this gives me this error of a positional argument, missing one required positional argument. So what's happening here? There are two very distinct things about functions. Now, functions, when we define them, we write def and then some function, right? So some func name. And then I can add in arguments. So argument 1, so arg_1, argument 2, argument 3, and so on, right? I can keep going down the list of these arguments. And then I can do something with those arguments, or just simply return one of them, or do whatever. I actually don't have to return anything. I could literally just say pass, and that's a way to just not do anything with that function. But if I don't actually do anything after declaring it, Python's going to get mad at me. So at the very least, I have to say pass or print or something like that. So what's going on here with these arguments? What is this, and what does it mean, and how do we use it exactly? Now, what I've talked about in day 7 was self. The self argument is a built-in argument for a class, and that's referring to any given instance of that class, right? I'm gonna try and say that 100 times, or as many times as possible, until that makes sense. Self is referring to the instance. Self is referring to the instance that you create when you create a object of a class, right? So that allows you to ignore that method when you're calling it, right? So I don't actually have to write in dog and then whatever ABC is, right? I don't actually have to do that. Dog is already implied because we said self. So I can get rid of that argument, and now I only have one, even though it looks like I have two. So let's go back to the functions themselves. Now, in this function, it says some func arg1, 2, and 3. If I copied this and pasted it into the terminal and called some func and with parentheses, hit enter, it's telling me now that I'm missing 3 required positional arguments, right? So positional arguments meaning this is in position 1, this is in position 2, this is in position 3. And since they are in those positions, they are required. Now, how do we make them not required? By using something called keyword arguments. So keyword arguments, so arg equals, I'm going to just make a little note here for you guys. Arg equals to argument, or positional argument, right? So we can just copy positional argument just so you have a reference point for it. And then this is something that's very common. So keyword arg equals to keyword argument. Now, a keyword argument means that I can set it equal to something in here. So if I said keyword argument equals to ABC, keyword arg1 equals to ABC, this is a keyword argument, much like a variable. So if I said ABC equals to new string, this is a keyword, right? It's actually a variable, but in the case of a function, it would be called a keyword argument. And a keyword argument is not necessarily required. In fact, you're going to set a keyword argument equal to something. So what if I set it equal to none, and I did that exact same thing over again? Let's just paste it in here. And I did some func. I get still that 3 error, right? 3 required positional arguments. Because again, each argument that you pass in here, if you do not set it equal to something or set it equal to none, then it's going to give us that error. So let's actually set arg1 equal to none and pass in this function again. Boom, I get another error. Non-default argument follows default argument. What the heck does that mean? All that means is that your non-keyword arguments, so your positional arguments, have to be before your keyword arguments. So they have to be in this format, right? So positional arguments are first, keyword arguments are second. Okay. So when you're doing this, this doesn't mean that you can't actually print these things out. So I can print out arg2 and arg3 as if they were variables because of how they're being passed. And that's why it's saying that they are required, right? So I can treat them as for sure being in there. Whereas the keyword arguments, especially if there's none there, I can't just assume that they're going to be there. So then I would have to say if arg1, or actually let's change this to keyword arg1 and 2, and then I'm going to change these back to 1 and 2. So then I would say basically if arg2, or excuse me, keyword arg1 is not equal to none, then I can print out keyword arg1. Okay, so all of this stuff is going to make more sense once we do it more. And that's true about everything that we're doing here, is once you have more practice with it, it will start to really sink in. But the key here, as far as these functions are concerned, is that if you have arguments and you do not set them equal to anything, then they must be passed. That's why we got that error up here, and that's why we keep getting an error with this sumfunc call that we've been doing here. So once you pass in those keyword arguments, then it just changes how that function actually works. So let's go ahead and run this sumfunc with some real life example. So sumfunc, and I'll just say ABC car, and I'll say keyword arg equals to not a big deal. So I go ahead and copy this, paste it in here. We need to make sure that I define the new sumfunc before I call it. So let's do that again, and we paste it in there. We've got our print statement being incorrect. Let's change that real quick. There we go. Okay, so let's try that one more time. And now sumfunc. And there we go. We've got ABC car, not a big deal. It prints out everything that we want. But notice when we're calling the function, I don't see exactly what I'm calling, right? So this probably doesn't make sense on an example like this, but let's do something different, like define send email. And let's say, for instance, I said email address to list and from list. So this isn't that descriptive, right? But if I said email equals to email address, and then to list equals to to list, and from list equals to from list, when I call it, it's going to make a lot more sense. So let's actually do some things here. So to list equals to abc@gmail.com, and then email address, I'll give it another at gmail.com. And then finally, from list equals to another 2 at gmail.com and hello at cfe.com. That's us. Okay, so this is a realistic function. And now that we have this send email, I can actually, let's say, call this function. I'm just going to say pass for now. But I can call this function now with send email and then actually write out all of this stuff. Or I could just say email equals to hello at cfe.com, or whoops, hello at team CFE, not CFE. Unfortunately, we do not own that one. And then a to list, I'll say abc@gmail.com or whatever, and then a from list, and so on. Okay, so the difference between this one and this one is how verbose it is, right? It's a lot easier to read what's going on with this function than it is with this function. Now, of course, a send email function, if this first one was just an argument like that, and I went like that, I mean, intuition would say, oh, I'm probably sending it here. But then the to list and the from list might make more different. It might make a bigger difference to actually declare those as keyword arguments. So understanding how those things actually play into all this will make a lot more sense once you get into it. Cool. So now let's go back into that animal and fix this. Really simple. I can pass something in here for color, and I'll pass it saying red. And now with this get color call, I'm going to say return get color plus a space plus ABC. And now I'm going to save that, go ahead and copy this and paste it in here. And now I see dog.getColor, brown, red. Kind of weird, doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But now that we have this method in here inside of our class, we can call it, and we have a better understanding of positional arguments and keyword arguments throughout the actual function itself. So that's where classes and functions can work in junction together very, very well. Now, the practical use case of this we'll talk about later, but as far as the concept is concerned, it's definitely there. Okay, so now what I wanted to talk about is something called properties. Properties is not actually that big of a deal because it's very similar to this stuff. So if we wanted to turn one of our functions into a property, such as this make noise method, right? So we have a method called make noise, but what if I didn't want to call it? So if I did dog, instead of dog.make underscore noise parentheses like that, what if I just wanted it to be dog.make noise without parentheses? How do I do that? Well, it's really simple. We just add a property method. Oops. We add a method decorator with the @ with property. And I'm not going to use that autocomplete feature. And now I can actually just do this. So it's really simple. Go ahead and copy this, paste it in, and then I do dog.make noise. And now it's saying it's a bound method. Oops, saying bound method. Oh, I know why. But first we'll do dog.make noise parentheses. It's doing grunt. We actually have to copy this entire thing for it to work. And now we see that without parentheses, it's doing make noise. Now this bound method of animal, that is showing us that this is a method, also known as a function of the class animal, and the function name is make noise, and it's also part of that animal object. This is a lot of complicated stuff, but it's basically just saying that. And that whenever you see this bound method is something of whatever, you have to know that what you're calling is a function, so all you have to do is put parentheses at the end of it and run it. Now, dog.make noise, after we added that property function to it, we no longer have to use the parentheses. In fact, if we use the parentheses, it will say string object is not callable. So basically, if you do string and put parentheses after it, it says it's not callable. Because a string isn't. A function is callable. A class is callable. Using parentheses is what makes it callable. All right, so that's the end of day 8. We definitely covered quite a few things here. But what we want to do now is start thinking about how we can actually design that email that we had originally, where we parsed some data and we actually sent out or created some sort of message. Now what we want to do outside of a function, we actually want to put that inside of a class now. So that's what we'll do in day 9. If you have any questions here, let us know. Otherwise, let's keep going.